Busting Loose from the Money Game by Robert Scheinfeld. Chapter 2. The Three Haunting Questions. Living is my job and my art. Michel Ecum de Montaigne, essayist. If I could only remember that the days were not bricks to be laid row on row, to be built into a solid house, where one might dwell in safety and peace, but only food for the fires of the heart. Edmund Wilson, critic and writer. Throughout recorded history, three questions have haunted humanity. 1. Who am I? 2. Why am I here? 3. What's my purpose? As you'll soon see, even if it doesn't seem clear immediately, without practical answers to those three haunting questions, busting loose from the money game isn't possible. You might also find it interesting to know that many of the puzzle pieces I'll be sharing in this chapter, and the two chapters that follow, were the very pieces my grandfather shared with me over that fateful cup of hot chocolate in Kranz, Switzerland. Because of the respect, even awe, I felt for my grandfather and his achievements, I accepted the concepts you are about to discover without question. However, they didn't become real for me. I didn't fully understand their significance or power, and I wasn't able to take any practical action from them until decades later, after I'd assembled more puzzle pieces and had more of the experiences I'll be sharing with you in the pages that follow. My belief is there's no way to know the absolute truth about the answers to those questions. Why? Because there are certain mysteries that are so huge and complex that they are beyond our understanding at our present level of consciousness and evolution. Since we can't be absolutely certain about the answers to the three haunting questions, all we can do is create models that approximate the truth closely enough to give us practical benefit in our daily lives. Therefore, what I'm going to share with you in the next few chapters is a working model that can truly empower you to bust loose from the money game. Is the model perfect? No. Can you pick holes in it if you try? Yes. What I can tell you is, despite its admitted weaknesses, it works extremely well. As I share the philosophical component of the model in this chapter and the next, if it seems a bit airy-fairy or warm and fuzzy to you, keep two thoughts in mind. 1. These are important puzzle pieces, no matter how they may seem at first glance. Once you read chapter 6, you'll understand how important they really are, and once you turn the last page of the book, your understanding of their significance will deepen further. 2. In chapter 4 and 5, I will be sharing the cutting-edge science that documents and validates the philosophical components of the model. That will be valuable for you if you have any challenges believing or accepting what I share in this chapter and the next. Let's take a look at the first haunting question. Who am I? If you've had exposure to books, tapes, or seminars about what's being called New Age, metaphysical, or spiritual thought, you've no doubt heard something like this. We are spiritual beings having a physical experience. I agree with that statement, and it aligns perfectly with the model I'm presenting to you. Who you really are is an infinitely powerful and magnificent being. Snap your fingers and boom, anything you want instantly manifests. No concepts of power you are familiar with comes even close to the infinite power and omnipotence of who you really are. All the forces of nature and man put together and multiplied 1 billion times are but a speck compared to the power at your disposal. Depending on your history and the beliefs you formed living through it, this is something that may sound or feel alien to you. However, it's also one of the things you'll be able to prove to yourself and actually experience if you follow the guidance I offer in this book. Because you have the power to create absolutely anything you want, your natural state is one of infinite abundance. In your natural state, you don't lack anything. Nothing is missing. No desire ever goes unfulfilled. As an infinite being, you are also in a constant state of joyfulness and peace. As an infinitely powerful, wise, and abundant being, you have an unlimited desire to express creatively and fully experience the expansion and joy that comes from that expression. In fact, as you've also soon see, all of human life is essentially about creative expression, no matter what it looks like. Now, let's take a look at the second haunting questions. Why am I here? You came here to play a game. In your daily life, you go about your daily routine. Then, from time to time, you step out of your routine to play games of various kinds. When I say games, I mean sports, board games, cars, mountain climbing, bike riding, bungee jumping, driving cars at high speeds, watching TV or movies or plays, reading a great novel, painting, singing, listening to music, or whatever you really love to do. You choose to play games for fun, enjoyment, entertainment, to challenge yourself, to explore what's possible, to stretch and expand. The same is true when it comes to why you are here. Coming from the place of being an infinite being at another level of consciousness, you decided to take time away from your daily routine to play a game too. That game is called the human game, of which the money game is a major subset. Does this surprise you? Does playing a game seem too trivial a reason to be here, or to explain what we call the pain, hardship, and the complexity of human life? If so, stick with me as more and more puzzle pieces are revealed. Let's now look at the third haunting question. What's my purpose? You have a general purpose and a specific purpose. The general purpose is to play the human game and receive the benefits people receive from playing all games: fun, enjoyment, entertainment, challenge, stretching, expansion, exploration, pushing the envelope of what's possible, and so on. Your specific purpose is to play the human game in the unique and precise way you choose as a unique infinite being. We all play the human game, but we do it in completely different ways. Even when it looks like we are doing the same things, doing things the same way, or for the same reasons, we are not. Everything is custom designed for us as unique infinite beings, as you clearly see after completing chapter 4 and 5. In The Creating Cosmos, Barbara Dewey said, using the term creating cosmos where I use the term human game, in the final analysis, I don't suppose the creating cosmos has a purpose greater than the joyful expression of creative possibility. Solely in the service of that purpose, it is a design of the most sublime construction. It is breathtaking both in its simplicity and its opportunity. It grants total freedom within a context of cooperation and partnership. There are no winners and losers in the creating cosmos concept. because each plays a game of his own choosing there are only winners. As we discussed in Chapter 1, all games start out with a concept. Then a playing field is built, then necessary tools and support resources like golf clubs, footballs, baseballs, tennis rackets are created, then rules, regulations, and structures are developed to which all players must strictly adhere if they want to play. It's the same with the human game. Let's now discuss the concept that drives the human game. I'm a big fan of the Star Trek television and movie series. In that show, there's a concept called the Prime Directive. The Prime Directive is a core principle that guides the actions of the crew of the Starship Enterprise as they explore space. The human game has a Prime Directive too. It's to fully explore what happens when you limit unlimited power, when you limit the infinite ability to express creatively, when you limit the infinite wisdom, abundance, joyfulness, and peace that's your natural state. I'm going to introduce this concept from a philosophical perspective in this chapter, and then continue the discussion from a nuts and bolts, day-to-day, practical perspective in Chapter 7 after a few more important puzzle pieces have been delivered to you. All the games we play were originally invented by someone who had a specific reason and motivation for creating them. The human game is no exception. From an expanded and infinite perspective, imagine that one infinite being thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see what would happen if I limited myself, restricted myself, hid all my power, wisdom, abundance, and joyfulness? Could I actually convince myself it was gone? Could I actually convince myself I'm the exact opposite of who I really am? What then? What would the whole journey and experience be like if I could pull it off? Since you are an infinite being, if you want to play a game of limitation and restriction, you have to create an alternative self or persona to be the main player of that game. You must then hide all awareness of who you really are and all your power, wisdom, abundance, joyfulness, and peace from that persona. You must then create other players to play the human game with you, a playing field on which to play, and a helper who can secretly guide you while you are blind to the truth about who you really are and what's really going on. The persona who plays the human game is the part of you who's reading this book right now, the part you've always thought of as you. The other players, as we'll discuss in detail in Chapter 6, are the people you see around you and interact with. The playing field is what we call the universe or physical reality or three-dimensional reality. The helper who secretly guides you is the real you, your infinite self, whom I'll be calling your expanded self throughout this book. Words get tricky here, but it's important to understand that while the persona and expanded self aspects of you feel and appear separate, they are actually one and the same infinite being that's unified at a very deep and profound level. The apparent separation is a necessary part of the illusion created by sleight of hand in consciousness we'll be discussing in the next 3 chapters. From the moment you, the persona, is born, you actually begin hiding your tremendous power, wisdom, and abundance from yourself and constructing an alternative reality playing field on which to play the human game. Before we continue our discussion of limitation, restriction, and the human game, allow me to plant the following seed in your expanding awareness, which also comes from Barbara Dewey. We mistakenly believe, therefore, that we are at the mercy of life rather than its creators. Such beliefs make us feel impotent, and we have hastened to fill in for these perceived weaknesses with technological aids. We are not encouraged to use our natural telepathic capacities. We have phones. We do not need total recall. We have computers. We do not need our homing instincts. We have maps. We do not need to practice health. We have doctors. In addition to hiding our power and creating an alternative reality on which to play the human game, you also convince yourself the hiding places are so painful, dangerous, scary, and deadly that they should be avoided at all costs, which we'll also discuss in later chapters. Just as a baseball game has 9 innings, football games have 4 quarters, and golf has 18 holes, the human game has 2 phases. Phase 1. During phase 1 of the human game, your expanded self uses all your power, creativity, and ingenuity to hide all awareness of who you really are and what your natural state is, and to keep you from finding it at any cost. Everything possible is done to convince you that the persona and the 3-dimensional playing field are real, and to limit and restrict you more and more until you are absolutely convinced you are the exact opposite of who you really are. In the popular success and self-help literature, this process is defined very differently and is generally called programming or conditioning. As you ponder this, ask yourself if you think it's any accident that the human game begins with us being born as helpless infants with no power, knowledge, or abundance of any kind. Phase 2. After forgetting who you really are and deeply immersing yourself in severely limiting and restrictive experiences in phase 1 of the human game, your expanded self starts nudging you into phase 2. At that point, you begin to feel incomplete, like you are missing something, like nothing makes sense anymore, like there must be something else going on you don't know about. You then start looking for answers and a higher purpose for your life. At that point, you still don't remember who you really are or how much power, wisdom, and abundance you actually possess. But you begin searching for the truth nevertheless. Your expanded self then flips roles, takes you on the treasure hunt of the century, and supports you in reclaiming all the power, wisdom, and abundance you hid in phase 1. Once you reclaim your power, wisdom, and abundance, you can then start playing the human game without limits or restrictions of any kind. I call that crossing the busting loose point, which we'll be discussing in later chapters. That's when things get very cool. By the way, it's no accident that you found your way to this book. You wouldn't be reading my words here unless on some level you wanted support in jumping into phase 2, or you are getting ready to jump into phase 2 and are using this book as basic training or warm-up. As you've been following along with me, this thought may have crossed your mind. Why would anyone want to play a game like that? Have so much power, abundance, and wisdom, hide it, then find it again. It sounds crazy. If thoughts like that did cross your mind, let me ask you 2 questions in response. 1. Why does anybody play any game? 2. If you take an honest and objective look, Are the rules, regulations, and structure of the human game really any more arbitrary or crazy than those of golf, baseball, basketball, soccer, football, chess, checkers, or Monopoly? As we discussed earlier, people play games for the sheer fun, challenge, and the exhilaration of playing, no matter how crazy they may seem at first glance or how difficult playing gets at times. People spend enormous amounts of time, energy, and money training for, playing, and watching games of all kinds and feel it's a perfectly legitimate activity. Why would it be any different for an infinite being with much more power, wisdom, and abundance? Or think about this. Why would someone willingly leave their warm and comfortable home to experience pain, hardship, and risk of death to participate in activities like climbing Mount Everest or driving a high-speed racing car? Here's the answer to all the questions like this that have occurred or may occur to you. Who you really are is a wonderfully adventurous spirit, ever eager to expand itself and its experiences. The human game of limitation is no big deal to the real you. The real challenge of the human game is forgetting who you really are and hiding all your power so you can play in the first place. Plus, consider this. Imagine you are an architect and you are hired to design an amazing building for a client. You'll visualize it in your imagination, then draw up the plans. That's a lot of fun and very rewarding, but it's even more exciting to see the building actually rise up in 3 dimensions and become real. The challenge, fun, and reward that come from embracing the human game idea, then seeing it manifest in 3 dimensions, then actually playing it is enormous. Just let this thought incubate for a while as I offer you more and more puzzle pieces. The following may also have occurred to you. Okay, maybe I can buy the idea of life being a game, but why would someone willingly choose to experience such horrors as abuse, sickness, poverty, struggle, starvation, rape, murder, and death as part of playing? Those things don't seem particularly fun or entertaining to me. I'll be discussing this in more detail in the chapters that follow, but for now, let me share a few thoughts. Who you really are sees no horror in any of those experiences and is actually having an absolute blast playing the human game. The real you knows none of those experiences are real and it's all just a game, just like you know what's happening up on the screen in a movie isn't real. The movie may scare or exhilarate you, but you know it's all made up and no one really gets sick, hurt, lives, dies, or makes $1 million. The real you know all experiences in the human game are simply made up to create a game and a playing field on which to play. The real you knows all your experiences only seem real and horrible to the personas who are totally immersed within them and convinced they are real. And that's the whole point of the human game, to make it all seem real when it's not. Making the illusion appear real was the biggest challenge in the design of the human game. However, beyond appearing real, the human game must be fascinating and hold our interest. Consider what Stein, a master editor of some of the most successful writers of our century, wrote about the art of crafting truly compelling fiction. When the baseball, football, or basketball season is at its height, a considerable portion of the American male population and a not insignificant number of females deploy hours away from work watching their sport on television. What the baseball fan, for instance, hopes for, consciously or not, are the moments of tension and suspense when a ball is hit but not yet caught, when a runner is headed for a base and has not yet reached it. The same applies to other sports as well. The spectator rooting for his hero experiences tension, suspense, anxiety, and pleasure, all things the readers hope for when they turn to a novel. The reader is enjoying the anticipation and excitement that are often worrying in life, but a pleasure when they are happening on the ball field or in a book. The same is true for us as infinite beings in our human game, total immersion movie experiences. We too want to experience tension, suspense, anxiety, and pleasure through our experiences. Stein continued by saying, "But let us remember that when a team, even the team we are rooting for, is winning too easily, our enjoyment of the game decreases. What the sports spectator and the reader enjoy most is a context of two strong teams, a game whose outcome hangs in the balance as long as possible." Stein's wise observations also shed light on why Phase 1 life isn't perfect and why we therefore create ups and downs, challenges, and the illusion of conflict in our total immersion movie experiences. The metaphor I'd like you to keep in mind for this going forward is the sun and clouds. Who you really are is an infinitely powerful, wise, and abundant being. Compare that to the sun. When you think about the sun, you think about enormous amounts of energy and power, right? It's a good fit. When you play the human game, however, you must create illusions that convince you you are the exact opposite of who you really are. That is, convince you you are a severely limited, restricted, vulnerable, fragile, poor, and weak creator who gets tossed about by people, places, and things you have no control over. That's the equivalent of creating a bunch of clouds, putting them in front of the sun, and convincing yourself there's no sun, the clouds are real, and the clouds are all there is. To extend the metaphor, if it's cloudy out, is the sun still shining? Yes. When there is a hurricane blowing, is the sun still shining? Yes. If it's raining, is the sun still shining? Yes. No matter what happens on our planet, the sun is always shining. It's the same with you. No matter what's going on in your life, no matter what the circumstances look like, who you really are doesn't change. You are still an infinite being whose natural state is infinite power, abundance, wisdom, joyfulness, and peace. You just convinced yourself the opposite is true, and I explain exactly how you did that in chapter 4 and 5. If you start out as an infinite being and in phase 1 of the human game, the goal is to limit yourself and convince yourself you are exactly the opposite of who you really are. Things can't work perfectly. You must have problems. Things can't make sense if examined closely and objectively. You've got to be uncomfortable a lot of the time. You can't experience true financial abundance, or at least not without a huge cost as we discussed. You can't feel consistently peaceful, satisfied, fulfilled, or happy. It's just not possible. Blocks and resistance to achieving your goals and fulfilling your desires must be common in phase 1. The feeling there's something missing or something wrong must nag at you, loudly or quietly. Why? Because that's the whole point of phase 1, to convince yourself you are the exact opposite of who you really are. If the goal is to limit, you don't expand. If the goal is to restrict, you don't open up. That's the way it works. Key point. To make phase 1 of the human game work, all truths must be distorted or skewed to keep you away from it and your power. As we discussed, the whole goal of phase 1 in a human game is to convince yourself you are the exact opposite of who you really are. Therefore, whenever any teaching attempts to explain what the human game is all about or how to play it in phase 1, that teaching must be skewed or distorted, or something important must be left out. In addition, to keep you away from your power and the truth, the techniques offered in association with that skewed and distorted truth must be sabotaged so they don't work at all or consistently. If you accept my challenge in chapter 12 and live through the portal into phase 2, you'll see this everywhere in the self-help literature, philosophy, metaphysics, mysticism, science, and religion. You look at what's being taught, track it, and say, that's true, that's true, that's true. Oh, and you'll see exactly where it got skewed or distorted or something was left out. It's actually quite fascinating. For example, when studying the popular self-help technique called visualization, you are taught you have unlimited power and can create any result you want if you just see a vivid picture of the result in your mind's eye. It's true that you have unlimited power in your natural state. However, you hide that power from yourself in phase 1 of the human game, so it's not really available to you, the star of your movie. It's true that you, meaning who you really are, your expanded self, can create anything you want. However, that process doesn't take place in the mind-eye you have as the persona and star of your movie. It takes place somewhere else, as you discover in chapters 4 and 5. The whole idea of visualization, affirmations, manifestation techniques, the law of attraction, and other popular self-help techniques are brilliant phase 1 creations. Why? Because we create them. We convince ourselves they are real. We apply them, but they don't work consistently, and that creates confusion, frustration, and limitations that perfectly support the goals of phase 1. As I mentioned in the introduction, I created a similar dynamic with my own Invisible Path to Success and 11th Element work. I had a clear lock on a lot of the truth, but to play in phase 1 of the human game, I had to skew it ever so slightly so my system would ultimately fail and keep me locked in limitation and restriction until I was ready to enter phase 2. Phase 1 of the human game is designed to take you to the point where you feel enormous frustration and pain, where you start to feel incomplete, like something's wrong, that there must be more to life, that something else must be going on that you don't know about. Reaching that point at a very high level of intensity is the signal you are ready to move into phase 2, or at least expand your view of what's possible for yourself. Key point. Part of the phase 1 strategy involves teasing yourself into believing you can fix things, improve things, get things running smoothly, get everything you want, become wealthy and happy. By design, however, that can never happen while you are playing phase 1 of the human game, despite what all the self-help, success, personal growth, and spiritual gurus claim. This is a subtle but very important distinction to get. Remember, whenever you decide to play a game, Whether it's chess, checkers, football, basketball, high-speed racing, mountain climbing, or whatever, you have to play by the rules, follow the regulations, and respect the structure, or you can't play. When playing the human game, true power, happiness, abundance, joyfulness, and peace don't return until you've been playing in phase 2 for a while, which I'm going to show you how to do. It's in phase 2 that a gateway opens and allows you to bust loose from the money game. I call that gateway the busting loose point that we'll be discussing in detail in later chapters, after I've laid a solid foundation for you. When you are ready to discover more of the truth about the human game and the true nature of the playing field we designed to play it on, turn the page to begin chapter 3.